No air support was sent.
So no AC-130 gunships, no fighter planes, right?
AC-130 gunships were never mentioned to me, only fighter planes out of Aviano.
And in fact, there was no request for airspace other than the UAV request to the Libyan government, right?
Yes, and that preceded the attack, if I'm not mistaken.
So when the order to stand down was given, who issued that order? Were you told, did Lieutenant Colonel Gibson told you who was ultimately responsible for issuing that order?
He did not identify the person.
Okay, so you don't know if it was the combatant commander?
I do not know.
Or whether it was the Secretary of Defense or the President, correct?
I have no idea.
And have you, since this incident has happened and you've been interviewed, have you been enlightened as to who was ultimately responsible for issuing the stand-down order?
I think that the right person to pose that question to is Lieutenant Colonel Gibson.
When you spoke with Secretary Clinton at 2 a.m., did she express support for giving military assistance to those folks in Benghazi? I.e., did she say that she would request such support from either the Secretary of Defense or the President of the United States?
We actually didn't discuss that issue. At the time, we were focused on trying to find and hopefully rescue Ambassador Stevens. That was the primary purpose of our discussion. Secondary purpose was to talk about what we were going to do in Tripoli in order to enhance our security there.
So as part of that discussion, though, you informed her that you guys in Benghazi were in fact under attack, correct?
The attack in Benghazi, she was aware of the attacks, but we were in phase 3. The first 2 attacks had been completed, and there was a lull in Benghazi at the time. So, and again, the focus was on finding the Ambassador Stevens and what the the Tripoli response team was going to do. We had at that time no expectation that there would be subsequent attacks at our annex in Benghazi.
So it was under you viewed it as secured at that point?
No, we knew the situation was in flux.
Okay. When you spoke to the president following the attack on the phone, did he say anything about deploying assets, why assets were not deployed?
I believe I spoke to him on September 17th or September 18th. So
right, after the attack. I know this was several days later. Did he say anything, or was it just to commend you about your service?
It was just a call to thank me for service.
Okay.
And
well,
praise the whole team.
I appreciate that. I think that this has been a good hearing. I think that there are still questions remaining. I think we need to know who actually gave the order to stand down. I'd like to know why you've been demoted, why the Secretary's Chief of Staff called you and spoke with you the way she did. And so with that, I'll yield.
Would the gentleman yield
to the chairman?
Thank you.
Committee chairman.
Always the right answer. Thank you. Mr. Hicks, 2 a.m, Secretary of State calls you personally. Not a common call.
No, sir.
Did she ask you about the cause of the attack? Did she ask about videos? Did she ask about anything at all that would have allowed you to answer the question of how Benghazi came to be attacked as far as you know?
I don't recall that being part of the conversation.
So she wasn't interested in the cause of the attack, and this was the only time you talked directly to the secretary where you could have told her or not told her about the cause of the attack?
Yes, that was the only time when I could have. But again, I had already reported that the attack had commenced and that Twitter feeds were asserting that Ansar Sharia was responsible for the attack.
You didn't have that discussion with her only because it was assumed that since you'd already reported that the cause of the attack was essentially Islamic extremists, some of them linked to Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman. Okay. Does the gentleman yield back? The gentleman yields back. We now proudly go to a second round, starting with Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hicks, in my first round, I asked you about Cheryl Mills, and you indicated in your response that this is a call that you always take, but frankly don't want to get. Cheryl Mills is the counselor to the secretary. She is chief of staff to Hillary Clinton. And is it common knowledge that of anyone in the State Department when the chief of staff to the secretary calls that is the perception that she is speaking on behalf of the secretary herself.
No,
But is
not necessarily.
not necessarily, but is the perception that it's pretty darn important based on your response earlier?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you got this call. I want to go back to the Chaffetz to Congressman Chaffetz's visit there. You were instructed that there was going to be an attorney accompanying Mr. Chaffetz, and this attorney was to be next to you at all times. I mean, here's what I'm trying to get at. The secretary has said nobody, from the Senate, nobody is more committed to getting this right. If the intent is to get it right and get to the truth, then why this concerted effort to shield the interaction of Congressman Chaffetz from you? That's what I'm not figuring out. If we want to get to the truth, shouldn't you and Mr. Chaffetz be able to have a dialogue and conversation without some babysitter from the State Department, some lawyer there monitoring, taking notes, calling back, doing all things that this individual did on that congressional visit?
I should be able to have a conversation with the congressman if he wants that.
And didn't you say Mr. Didn't you say, Mr. Hicks, in my first round that this was the first and only time this had ever happened where someone from the State Department accompanied a congressional visit, and you were instructed specifically by the State Department, do not talk to Congressman Chaffetz or anyone on the committee's delegation who was there without this lawyer being present?
That's correct.
And shortly after the one time when you did have a chance to interact with Mr. Chaffetz and the lawyer was not present, when it was not present, you got a phone call from Cheryl Mills.
That's correct.
And on that phone call, what did she say?
She asked for a report on the visit, which I provided. The tone of the report, the tone of her voice was unhappy, as I recall it, but I faithfully reported exactly how the visit transpired. I described the content of the briefing that...
Can I interrupt you right there, Mr. Hicks? Were you in a classified briefing at the time and were pulled out of that briefing to talk to Ms. Mills?
I recall the phone call afterwards.
Okay.
I was pulled out of the briefing, but I don't recall that was the time when I talked to Councilman Mills.
What were you pulled out of the briefing for?
I actually can't remember, to be honest with you.
But in close proximity to the time you had the briefing, the one time you were apart from the minder from State Department, you received a call from Ms. Mills.
Yes.
Okay. I guess, Mr. Chairman, I just want to stress. I mean, this is the equivalent of Rahm Emanuel when he's chief of staff. When he calls, for my colleagues on the other side, when he calls, you take the call. You understand that's important, and you understand that he is representing the White House. When Cheryl Mills calls, you understand. Everyone in the State Department understands. This is the person right next to Secretary Clinton, and the fact that we had, for the first time in Mr. Hicks's 22-year history of serving this country, someone accompany a congressman on a visit after we lost 4 American lives, and that individual has to be in every single meeting. There can't be personal interaction between these two discussing what took place, is completely unprecedented. With that, I'd be happy to yield to the chair.
Mr. Hicks, you and I have known each other throughout the Middle East for a number of years, but in all my years of traveling in the Middle East, anytime I was head of a congressional delegation, I had a one-on-one with the ambassador, often in an automobile going to see a head of state or something else. Over the years that you've watched great ambassadors, have you ever failed to see the head of a delegation coming, get a one-on-one? Isn't that part of sort of the ceremony of that relationship and how you treat the head of a congressional delegation? Not just this is an exception, but isn't it always a one-on-one meeting at some point during a leadership meeting?
Every CODEL that I've been involved in, that's been standard.
So they were telling you to, Senate confirmed, a political appointee of the Secretary of State, her right-hand person, was telling you to breach protocol.
Well, the 2 lawyers did. The conversation with Councilor Mills occurred after.
Okay, so it was in fact people sent by the State Department told you to breach protocol and not provide anything, even if requested by my personal emissary, Mr. Chaffetz, on that code out. Told you not to talk to him privately, even if he asked.
That's correct.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding. We now go to the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Hicks, I was just listening to your testimony. During your interview with the committee, you were asked point blank, and that was closer to the time that this happened, whether anyone at the department instructed you to withhold information from Representative Chaffetz. At any time during that trip, you were asked, and I quote, "Did you receive any direction about information that Congressman Chaffetz shouldn't be given from Washington?" And you replied, "No, I did not." Is that still your testimony? I'm not just saying this is your sworn testimony. I'm just looking at the testimony. You don't remember that?
I recall saying that I was instructed not to allow personal interviews with the
I'm not trying to twist you up. I'm just going on what
I understand, but I recall also stating that I was not to allow personal interviews between Congressman Chaffetz, the RSO, the acting DCM, or me.
Okay, so in other words, you did say that you were told to make sure that other State Department officials were present. Is that right? Is that what?
That's correct.
Present for meetings with Representative Chaffetz, and
that's correct.
As you stated, and they told me not to be isolated with Congressman Chaffetz. Is that correct? They didn't tell you not to say anything, but they said that don't be isolated. I guess
they said not to have a personal interview with him.
Yeah, just by yourself. I'm not trying to.
I understand.
I'm just trying to be clear. That's all.
I understand. I understand what you're.
Okay, now, Mr. Hicks, you said that 4 military personnel were told not to board that plane, and that this call, you don't know where it came from. That's what you said a few minutes ago. And so you did not know that it came from the Special Operations Command Africa?
I knew it came from Special Operations Command Africa. I do not
know the individual.
I did not know who.
I got you. And I just wanted to clear that up because it wasn't clear.
That's okay. Thank you.
On October 1st, 2012, the Secretary of State convened an accountability review board led by Thomas Pickering, Ambassador Admiral Michael Mullen, to investigate the attacks in Benghazi. After interviewing more than 100 people, viewing hours of videotape, and reviewing thousands of pages of documents, the ARB issued a very thorough report in December 2012, setting forth the results of its review. Mr. Hicks, did you meet with the ARB as part of that investigation?
I had an interview with them for about 2 hours.
Okay. And Mr. Nordstrom, did you meet with the ARB as a part of the investigation?
Yes, on multiple occasions.
It is my understanding that a cable went out to every employee at the State Department informing them of how to contact the ARB if they wanted to bring information forward. Mr. Thompson, did you receive that notice?
I did.
Right. And did you contact the ARB and request to meet with them?
I did.
And so did you end up meeting with the ARB as part of their review?
I did not.
Did anyone try to stop you from meeting with the ARB?
No.
Earlier this week, Congressman Chaffetz claimed that the ARB report was incomplete because they never even interviewed Secretary Clinton. According to Ambassador Pickering, the ARB met with Secretary Clinton near the end of their investigation, and during that time, they had the opportunity to discuss the report with her and could have asked her any questions they wanted. Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen have put out a joint statement.
I was just saying, I think that very clearly says they didn't interview her. They just talked about the report and could have, but didn't ask her. Is that right? It makes his case.
Well, that's why we need to have. No, I'm not trying to make any case. I'm just trying to get out the facts. But that's even more reason why we need to have Pickering in here, and I'm glad you've agreed to do that. And I just want to finish this question because I want to stay within the time limits. Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen have put out a joint statement